Hello learners and welcome to Chapter 7 Part 1, all about the skeletal system. Now first things first, you want to make sure that you are going to the after lecture sections in the modules to go ahead and download the Exam 2 study guide so that you know which bones you are responsible for understanding and learning. Let's go ahead and see what we get to learn about this entire time. So for Part 1, we're going to be focusing on our bone marking review, just a quick review of bone markings. We're going to go over a skeletal system overview, and then we'll focus on the axial skeleton. Okay, next we'll focus on, for Part 2, the appendicular skeleton and development aspects of bones and a couple of clinical conditions, literally 2, osteoporosis and scoliosis. Axial skeleton is going to be the skull, the spine, and the rib cage, and so that's what we'll be focusing on today. Here is a visual frontal view of the actual skull here, and we'll be getting into majority of the bones that you see that are going to be very important for us. Okay, so like parietal, nasal, maxilla, mandible, vomer, inferior, nasal concha. Yes, we will be seeing those. And then for the appendicular skeleton, that's going to be your upper and your lower limbs, and then the girdles are which help attach your upper and lower limbs to the axial skeleton. So we'll give you some details as we go along. But first, let's go ahead and get a review of bone markings. Now, your goal is not to remember every single detail about bone markings, but I just want to make sure you have an idea of some bone markings because, yes, there's a lot of bones to get through, but some of them have specific bone markings that are going to make it easier for you to remember what they are and what they look like. So what I've done is taken that same kind of chart that's in your textbook and made like a generalization of bone markings table. Of course, we're still going to have our projections, we're still going to have our joints, and we're still going to have our depressions and openings. Of course, they just look a little different. So for example, one of the main ones that you will see is going to be like a process. It's going to be any bony projection that's sticking out of any bone shape that you have. Another one is going to be a foramen, which we saw as well. It's going to be just a hole. You usually will say a round or oval hole, or you could just say hole, okay? And you can see large ones, you can see small ones, and that can help basically with structure or remembering some of these pieces as well. Now, again, the beauty of your study guide is that it does have the bones and also the muscles list that you're going to need as we go through this next exam. But it does not have a lot of details about the bone markings. So I think it's going to be important as you're going along to just kind of print this out or at least have a note card for this and say, okay, if I'm remembering what the femur looks like for the appendicular skeleton, I know that it has certain bone markings that are involved. Or what are the bone markings that are going to help us distinguish the like shape of the sphenoid bone, excuse me. Another thing you might be looking at is good old tuberosities. And what I've done is just made it more easy for you to understand. So for example, we will use a groove as one of the depressions and openings for the sphenoid bone, and that is like a shallow gutter, okay? And that's going to be where your pituitary gland is going to be. Then we can have things like a tuberosity or large bump for muscle pull that's going to be in like the diaphysis area of a femur, for example. Or when you're looking at like the humerus or the femur and they have a head, which is like a large ball that helps with just making those certain articulations. Articulation is going to be another word you hear. It just means that bone connects to a joint. So for bumps on some of these, which again, it's not going to be on everything that you have to remember, but just on the ones that might be as important. You can have a tubercle, which is small, tuberosity, which is larger, or trochanter, which is only on the femur, for example. And that means that, oh, wait a minute, trochanters might be very important bone marking that I need to remember because it is on the femur only. Or joint surfaces like the head, which is like the ball, if you're doing a ball and socket joint. A facet, which is flat, a condyle, which is like the knuckles at the end of those femurs as well. And usually you'll see some condyle at the end of the humerus too. Openings like a foramen, like we've seen, a hole, a meatus, like a tunnel, which we're going to see some of when it comes to the temporal bone of the skull. A fissure or a slit, spaces like sinuses for air, and also a fossa for like a socket, for example. So again, I recommend you basically take this little piece and print it out and then start to just use that as you're going through and figuring out the structure of some of these bones. All right, folks, so let's go ahead and get our skeletal system overview. The skeletal system, as we know, is going to be made with bones, cartilages, joints, and ligaments of the body. So joints and ligaments we get in for chapter 8. Okay, and then, of course, cartilages we've seen before. But we do have a couple of specific cartilages we'll get into a little bit here when it comes to the thoracic cage or the rib cage. And of course, we've seen some in chapter 6 as well. But our focus for chapter 7 is really going to be the bones. And there are usually 206 named bones in the body. And that is a very scary number when you're thinking about the fact that you have to actually remember some of these bones. But the good news is we break the bones up into groups, okay? So you don't have to remember all 206 named bones. And actually, the number of bones a person has does vary by their age and by the individual. For example, when we are born, we're born with way more bones, right? And as we get older and as we age, those bones begin to fuse together, and so that's how we end up getting a range of bones around 206. Now, why am I saying a range of bones? Because guess what? Some bones fuse and some don't. So some people may have a higher number because they didn't fuse. Or it depends. Some folks don't even develop certain bones, or they have an extra set. So that number will vary as well. Now let's get into the details of how these 206 bones are organized. Well, first, we're going to have the axial skeleton, which is going to be the skull, spinal column, and of course our ribs. You can also just say the rib cage here. You can also say thoracic cage as well. See, look, this is 80 bones. So you're sitting here like 80 bones. Jesus Christ, how much am I supposed to focus on? Well, guess what the good news is? Good news. So there's 80 bones, but about 48 of those bones are going to be bones that you don't really need to know. Why? Because you can have 24 vertebrae, and we only focus on the shape and also the size of different foramen for those vertebrae. And then you have 24 ribs. And again, we only talk about the shape of one rib, and then we apply it to all the 24 ribs that we have. Okay, and of course we categorize our ribs as well. So right there, that's 48 of those bones, and then you're just responsible for some of the other ones. The skeleton is here in blue. Of course, we have our skull, we have our vertebral column, and then we also have our thoracic cage or rib cage. And as you can see, this is going to help you go along the axis of your body, which is why it's called axial. And it gives your body structure, and of course, it protects some of the most precious internal organs, like our brain and our lungs and our heart, for example. Now, the appendicular skeleton is a little bit more bones, 126 bones. And these are going to be bones that are going to be involved with your limbs, so your upper limbs and your lower limbs, okay, and the pectoral, and put pectoral here, pelvic girdles. So let me go ahead and highlight the girdles first. So we have our girdles here. Let me get a better, come on, let me get a better color. Okay. So we already know our upper and our lower limbs, and let's go ahead and see these girdles here. So we have our pectoral girdles here, and also our pelvic girdles. And these girdles' goal is to make sure the axial skeleton to the appendicular skeleton. Okay, that's going to be one of the main goals of those. So we kind of think of these girdles as part of the arms and the legs, and that's how we make up the appendicular skeleton. Now, what does the appendicular skeleton do? It provides movement. So because it has the ability to attach to your axial skeleton, just think of it as, hey, my axis of my axial skeleton is being supported, and then of course it's supporting the weight of my body, and then of course I have my limbs as well, and those girdles also helping to support the weight of the body and be connected to the axial skeleton and allow me to move my arms and legs any way I like. All right, folks, let's go ahead and move forward and get into the skull. That's going to be the first part of the axial skeleton that we focus on. See you in the next video.